Hello and welcome to SPWT Radio. Today we are joined by me, BT, Myrtle, and one of St Paul's Way's wonderful RE teachers, Miss Cook. How are you today, Miss?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
We're now going to ask Miss Cook a few questions about Presbyterianism and Quakers. So here we go. How do people who follow Presbyterianism and Quakers change the way they act to follow both their religion and fit in with society?
Okay, I need to answer this differently for each denomination. I think Presbyterians would probably suggest that they shouldn't do that changing your religion just to fit in with the way that society has developed is not something that should be encouraged. They do, however, believe that the church reform is important, but that should come from within the church rather than the church reflecting society. So they were part of the Reformation movement, and because of that they believe that the church needs to update itself and to review its beliefs and practices, but that should come from within the church.
Was this in Scotland, Miss?
So the church is the official church in Scotland, and they are established from a man called John Calvin.
Yeah.
He's the kind of founder of their belief system, also a man called John Knox, I believe.
Yeah.
But they do, however, have some principles that I think are quite relevant to the modern world, so they try to combat things like pride and aggression, and they say that those are bad traits that we shouldn't use. And I think that even though those are quite old teachings that come from them being kind of 300-400 years old, that they're still quite relevant to today, and so they wouldn't bend to societal changes just for the sake of it, but they would be prepared to reflect and try and modernise their church teaching based on the founding fathers and their principles.
So they're not stuck in the past?
No, I think they would argue very much they're not stuck in the past, and they don't cling to things that they think actually were incorrect. So they're quite prepared to accept that sometimes humans interpret religion incorrectly, and they therefore need to change their ideas. So they developed as a breakaway from the Catholic Church, and as a result of that they don't have issues with things like divorce, unlike the Catholics who believe that divorce as a sacrament, it's impossible to undo it. Catholics will compare divorce to being born, or marriage to being born rather, and so it's impossible to be unborn and it's impossible to be unmarried, whereas Presbyterians don't think like that.
Okay.
Right.
Quakers, on the other hand, though, have been very free with their ideas, and always very free with their ideas, and they very much emphasise the use of individual conscience rather than strict religious teaching. So it's up to the individual. They believe that you have God inside you and you need to listen to that voice, and so they are much more able to reflect societal changes because they don't have such a strict doctrine to follow, and so it's less hypocritical or compromising for them to change their ideas depending on what society develops.
Okay.
So they're quite similar in
I
some
think,
respect.
yeah, in the ways that then they're not holding to something that is unchanging.
Yeah.
In terms of teachings, but the Presbyterians believe that the Bible is the Word of God and that they should follow that, and that is unquestionable and unchanging, whereas Quakers have a very different view of the Bible, and therefore don't have to worry so much rigidly about sticking to the laws and the rules within the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our second question for you is, what practices and beliefs do you agree or disagree with from the denomination of Presbyterianism, and why?
Okay, so I think the principle of avoiding pride and aggression is a really useful thing that many people today could learn from and try and embody. I think we can be a very proud and aggressive race, and lots of the problems that we experience as a society are caused by those things. And so I think that's definitely something that people could learn from. I think it's not that I necessarily disagree with, but the thing I find most difficult to reconcile is their belief that the Bible is the complete Word of God. I think to look at a book that spans around 6,000 years of history and has very obvious contradictions in it, and a lot of things that people just dismiss and disregard, but then other things that people cling to and believe to be important, I think it presents a logical problem for people to cling to that book as being the absolute total Word of God.
What practices and beliefs do you agree or disagree with from the denomination of Quakers?
Okay. Again, I think that it's really important, this idea within Quakers, that everything you do is about showing worship to God. So rather than just focusing on one day or one service or one ritual or a particular special festival, that your entire life should be giving value and worth to God, which is essentially what worship means. And so I think that that's a really interesting way of viewing your life, and I think it makes for a very different way of responding to God than maybe ones that emphasise ritual and practices and festivals more so maybe than the Quakers do. But I do think that its lack of structure and guidance could sometimes be a problem, that people could justify all sorts of things arguably by following their conscience. I don't think it's actually becoming a problem within Quakers. I don't think, Quakers have done terrible things because they believe that God has told them to do it. But I think their inability to create any structure, or the lack of the desire they have to create structure and strong guidance for people could cause problems. And it can seem a bit kind of wishy-washy. They don't really think anything is important, yet they think everything is important, and it's kind of a bit complicated sometimes for people.
Okay, so our next question is, which is also our final question for you, Miss. Overall, which denomination do you think you would prefer to be a part of, and why?
Okay, I think Quakers appeals to me as an individual very personally. It's as an atheist, it would be very difficult for me to believe or to be part of a religion that is so focused on God and the Bible being the word of God. Obviously, it would be very difficult to belong to any religion being atheist, but Quakers has a much freer idea and a kind of easier, you can interpret it easier, and less emphasis on kind of worshipping God and you being created by God and that kind of thing. And I think it would allow you to express your freedom more so than something like Presbyterianism.
Thank you very much for having an interview with us today, Miss. You've been absolutely wonderful.
It's been a pleasure, thank you.